Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is a little collection of foods that I took out of my freezer not too long ago to feed to my worms. And the worms that are getting fed today are the two systems that I refer to as my odd couple pair of bins. And the reason I gave them that name was because I got tired of calling them what I had been referring to them as the two bins that have 60 days difference in between their ages or something along those lines. I guess most obviously is the old name was kind of a mouthful, and odd couple just sounds better, I think. So I guess the cool thing about these systems at this point now is that they are my oldest active systems. Well, what am I saying? No, okay, so the systems that are older are still active, but they're already beyond the stage of their life cycle where I would consider them to be actively composting. Because these systems I consider to be actively composting still, but the other systems that I'm still trying to wind down and bring closure to are already in the process of trying to get the worms to migrate out of their finished castings and get us to the point where we can harvest those castings and move the worms on to greener pastures. And in fact, in the case of one of those systems, or a couple of systems, we've already managed to move the worms on. Quite a difference here, right? Plastic coverings over here seem to result in much more surface activity and much finer material coating the top surface, just freshly deposited castings, versus hardly any traffic out here where it was just cardboard and paper covering. Even a little bit of leftover of the food they got last time, which was just some leaves of radish bunches, the leaves. See another piece of it right here. Over here, not even any signs, well, not to say any signs, but perhaps very little remaining signs of what I believe was a similar piece of paper like this placed out on top to be a sort of a feeding zone indicator. I had already come in here prepared to remove these plastic coverings from the younger bin over here and put paper coverings, much like what we have out here on the older system, to try to allow the systems to dry off a little bit more. For the past few check-ins now, we've been doing that over here in the older system to see if we can get the material in here to lose some of its moisture content. Because if at some point we want to think about getting the worms to exit this material on their own, like if we're doing migration, for example, I think we would want the material to be considerably drier than this, which would serve as motivation for the worms to want to exit the material. If the material's nice and damp and cozy, they'll just sit in the stuff, even if there's very little remaining food left, or at least stuff that we would classify as remaining food, because from their point of view, castings that they've left behind from eating previously applied food portions still serves as a viable meal for them, because they can re-ingest their poop, if you will, over and over again. I forget what the number is, but half a dozen or more times, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Because the stuff that they eat goes through their system so quickly that it still has a very high quantity of nutritional value that they can tap into later if they return to that little batch of castings that they left behind from a previous meal. And they can just gobble that up again and continue to use that as a source of nourishment. So sometimes you need to combine both the powers of attraction by setting up a migration feeding zone, which is meant to lure the worms over with lovely fresh food and bedding. Combine that lure with repulsion. And the repulsion that works best is typically a lack of moisture, because once they're occupying material that's a little too dry for their liking, their tendency is to try to find better material, better being more damp and comfortable to be in. So, I mean, just from the initial glance coming in here, I almost had this feeling like it would be good to come into here and, get back to putting plastic coverings just to see if we can get some more nice fine material to be collecting out on the surface like we see out there on the younger system where we're still covering with plastic. But I think the better move is to do the exact opposite, which is to, at this point, get the younger system in sync with the older system to allow for some drying to begin occurring. And that's the reason I've prepared to replace those plastic coverings with what you see here, which is paper and cardboard, so that when we're done here today, both systems will be covered with a more porous, breathable substance, paper and cardboard, versus being covered in plastic. And then I think we're going to be paving the way to getting these systems both geared up for getting the worms separated from their castings one way or another. I mean, migration is the method that I typically prefer to use because I guess the logic behind is that you're kind of letting the worms do all the work. You're just setting up a place for them to go, and then they go there on their own accord. But like I said earlier, I think the one way to stack the deck in your favor to make that an action that the worms do on their own voluntarily is to allow the material that they're living in to begin drying. So I think that's probably the way we're going to play it. Let's just complete a quick till of this material here too, like we did over in the older bin. The younger bin here is now 256 days of age. So only 100 days away from reaching 1 year of age. The older bin, 316 days of age. So only about a month and a half or so, less than 2 months away from reaching a year of age. A good number of worms living in both of these systems from what I can tell. It's nice to be able to till through the material and see worms living everywhere. What I've been trying to do to encourage the worms to be pretty much everywhere in both systems is to not follow my typical feeding method. My typical feeding method is to empty out a trench down the center of the container, drop the food in there, possibly a little bit of supplemental bedding to go with the food, maybe a little grit even, and then I'll mark that feeding area down the middle so we know where we fed. But what we've been doing lately here, despite the fact that there was a feeding zone indicator actually in both bins, even though you couldn't see any sign of it over here in the younger bin, it got eaten up. But the feeding zone indicators were a little bit misleading because we have been feeding over the past, I believe, 3 feedings now. We've been feeding all across the surface, and the whole idea behind that is to not concentrate their activity into only the center of the bin, but rather have them go everywhere in the bin in pursuit of the foods that we laid out for them. So I'm going to follow that same pattern. The last feeding, like I mentioned earlier, included just the leaves of radishes. The feeding prior to that had been strawberries and worm chow. So I figured we'd continue on with that feeding pattern of spreading the foods out across the top surface in both systems to try to motivate the worms to cruise around everywhere and not be drawn into one particular place. I mean, whether I'm causing them to cruise around everywhere or not, I don't know, but I believe by doing it this way, we are at least not kind of corralling them up into a single spot, luring them or attracting them to a single location in the bin, but rather giving them good motivation to travel the entire contents of both bins. So now, I guess we can drop in some of this excess moisture at this point, kind of counter to what I was mentioning earlier, which was the desire to see both systems dry, but a couple flakes of ice I don't think is going to be a problem. So I got some other stuff here. I got my supply of used coffee. I figured we can sprinkle a little bit of this out across the top. Same thing over here, because you can see the stuff is beginning to pile up. So I figured we'd give them some of this, as well as a little bit of my worm chow too. Spread out across the entire top surface, as was done with the frozen foods. And then I believe we can begin covering up. So I don't know what to do about this feeding zone indicator thingy over here. I mean, we can always split it down the middle. Should the worms in these systems have a hankering for a little bit of paper product, let them have at that right there. We're going to leave the plastic off and come in now with a replacement for that, which is going to be a little bit more breathable. And yeah, it's going to result in the same thing we saw over in the older bin, which is a little less activity on the surface, possibly some leftovers, probably far fewer freshly deposited castings on the surface. But that's okay. I do want to see the material in both of these systems dry out a little bit more, and I like the direction the direction that this stuff here in the older system is taking, as far as its moisture content seeming to drop gradually. I even think I felt it in the weight of the bin when I lifted it. It seemed a little bit lighter as a result of it being able to lose some of its moisture through these more porous top coverings of paper and cardboard. And I suppose we could even do better than this if we were to just leave the cardboard off, but I don't want to go through a drastic change like that. I think this is a good step in the right direction. So we'll leave it at that. So that's it for our check-in now with the odd couple systems. They're again only called that because of the difference in their ages, 60 days difference in their ages. And in the case of the older bin, feeding number 28 just went in here. Feeding number 22 just went in here in the younger system. So we'll let these systems go again. It's been 12 days since the last check-in. Maybe we'll come back in sooner. Maybe we'll stick to the same approximate interval between feedings. But for now, I'm still considering these as actively composting systems. Like I said, all the older systems than these are already in the process of trying to separate worms from castings, but I think here we're going to continue on, at least for a little while longer. Even though the feedings have been modified to be surface feedings and spread out to, encourage traffic throughout the systems, we're still actively composting here. So that's it for the video, everyone. Got a few things I got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away. I'm not going to waste your time with that. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.